Just wanted to welcome everyone to this user group. As usual, Jim will be presenting, and please let us know if you have any questions or want to talk. You are granted access to talk with microphone and camera. And if you can, please let us know in the chat. And we will be sending this recording to all registrants and attendees. And so, yeah, if you know somebody who cannot make it, just let them know they will be getting the recording. So, yeah, that was all. Go ahead, Jim.
Right, thanks. And again, thank you everyone for joining. So we did this webinar back in December. We got a great response from it, and we decided to show it to our user group members who may not have seen it back in December. And it's really about how do we automate the mundane necessary tasks associated with your data. And for those of you who don't know, I'm James Dumont. I am a technical specialist at MicroCAD. So even though we're going to be talking about Vault, one of the things we really want to bring up with anyone who has had any conversation with me in the past know that I'm very passionate about iLogic. And one of the things that we can do with the iLogic is that most of us using Vault Professional have some kind of requirements in place. For instance, we can't release a file or an item if it's missing some data like description, like we see here. So if you try to release a document and it doesn't have the necessary properties, you're entering it. And what's happening is you're entering it twice. You have to enter it for the model and you have to enter it for the drawing file. Now, if using items is a little different, it's just on the model, but I have to say 90% of the users today are doing file management, so the data has to be everywhere. And there's a couple of ways that we can actually do this. You have to open up the actual drawing file and you have to enter the information manually. Now, we know the title blocks can consume the data that's in the model, either the part or the assembly file, but the drawing iProperties have to be there as well in order to be inside a Vault and to be released. One other way that you can do this, for those of you who are not familiar with this is called the copy property. So in a drawing file, I can copy the properties from the base view into the iProperties that match. You can do all of them. You can be very specific. It's not bad, but it's a little bit tedious because if the model changes, if someone changes the description or company or any iProperty, you have to go back to the drawing file and repeat this process. So what I prefer to do is use a little bit of iLogic code. And I say this to everyone that I speak with. iLogic is useful to anyone using Inventor. It just has benefits at the lowest level and the highest level. So let's just show you how this works. So I'm going to bring up in my Inventor. And let's go to actually Vault. Let's open up this file right here. So in Vault, you can see that the model has title and description, has part number, all that information is there, but the drawing does not. And if I open up this file, I can check it out. The title block will consume the data from the model, but the problem is the iProperties. This needs to be filled in for both. So what I'd like to do, instead of doing any of the other manual steps, I like using the iLogic, and I like the external rules because if I introduce code today, this will be able to be useful for files that you create from this point on and files that you've done in the past. If it's an internal or a rule that exists in the file, if you did the template file, it would only be for new files. I like to make things a little bit more global. So I'll go to my user group meeting and I just created a rule here. I will edit it and it's empty. And what I did, I took the time. So for instance, when I wanted to do this, I wasn't quite sure, how to code it. What was the syntax? So I did a little searching online into the forums. I found some text and I simply just modified it from there. So basically all this does, I'm just going to copy this text. This is in Notepad. I'm going to bring it into my rule editor. It's just seeing if the drawing actually has a model. If it does, it saves the file name, the model name to a variable called model name. And all it's doing here, it's setting the I properties of the drawing to match that of the model. And that's all it does. And you can add additional properties just by doing a copy paste, making a couple of edits and changes. Now save this. So now right here, if I take a look at this, my title is empty, description is empty, but if I run the rule, title is filled in, description's filled in, this is great. But what I don't want to do is have to run the rule every time. So they have these event triggers. So under manage, event trigger, and the trigger I want is, hey, whenever I save the drawing, just bring in the data automatically. So instead of being this document, it's only this particular file that I'm in, I'm going to say all drawings. And before I save, I'd like you to run this rule before I save any document. And that's it. So Inventor is now configured. So no matter what, I open up a file, it'll always copy those properties every time into my file and my documents. So I am good to go. So now if I check this file back in, refresh the data. Now the drawing properties has description, title, and whatever necessary property that I want. It could even be custom properties. We have a lot of companies that have UDPs, user-defined properties. Whatever they're out there, it's just a matter of tweaking that code to do the copy and paste update, and it's that simple. So now when you want to release your files, you're not getting that message where, hey, properties are missing. It's stopping you from doing that. So the iLodge is a great way to handle that little mundane task. Okay, let's go back to here. Copy design. Copy design is a big deal. It's a common practice to copy a file or an assembly to create another one. However, what happens a lot of times is when you use copy design, if I'm taking a file, I use Kim, she's online right now. If I'm working at Relax for a temporary situation, if I copy a file that she did, I'm creating a brand new file. The last thing I want is her name in the title blocks and the date that she created it. I'm copying it. It should have my name and today's date. And the other thing is, if you're using the signatures, those should be cleared away. So I'm creating a brand new file. So I want to be able to copy it and clear those settings at the same time. We can actually do that using the copy design. And again, this whole webinar today, the user group, is all based on Inventor and Vault Professional. Most of the things, actually, iLogic is fine, but everything else I'm going to be showing you is really based on Vault Professional. So in the copy design, most people just take it out of the box and use it as is. So let's actually bring up my settings again. Here's a file, and if I look at the drawing, I'm going to see it was drawn by SLD, and the date was back in 22. I want to copy this, but I want to clear, I want to change the date to me, today's date, and I want to clear all these other fields. If you just do a straight copy design, which is one of the most powerful uses of Vault, Vault Basic and Vault Pro, but what I'm going to show you right now is only the professional version. If I copy this file, and I like using the numbers, I'll just do a sequential numbering scheme. However, if I just copy this, I'm using the default rule set. That's out of the box. If I define something, I can create a rule. I call it the MTC rule. And if I edit this, this is going to do a few things. It's going to do all of this information right here. It's going to map the part number to the file name. It's going to reset the category. The biggest thing, author, it's set to me. And all of the other approved and dates are being cleared. And the date that a file is being created or copied is today. So I'm going to use this rule. Now, what I can do is I have the default rule set by default. But if this is something I do all the time, I would just change that to be my default rule. So I don't have to manage it, remember to do this. And the other thing that's really nice, starting with 2021 Vault Professional, these rules, if I create it and save it, It's it can be used by anyone in the system. It's no longer saved to my computer and my local settings. So these are global settings. So I'll hit apply to that. Now if I execute the copy, here's my new file. Let's open it up and take a look at it. I don't think I used the rule, sorry. Operator error. I think I told it to use the default, but I was still using the default. Let's try that once more. This is a live webinar. All right, copy design. Empty C rule, that should do it. Copy. And let's do change scheme to, let's do frame and execute. I am using the MTC rule. All right, there it is here. Let's just take a peek at it inside a vault. Update the view. There we go. That's what it's supposed to do. It helps if you use the right rules when you actually create them. Sorry about that. But drawn by is me, today's date, and it clears all the necessary fields. So that is the copy design. Again, manipulating the data. What this webinar is focused on is how to do these things automatically that you're manually doing day in and day out. Okay. Any questions?
I don't see any questions at the moment.
So this is nice. We used to get asked this an awful lot. If I'm creating a brand new project, we typically have similar folder structures, right? You might have assemblies, drawings, and parts. And whenever you create a new project, you have to create those folders and then put them on the local structure, local drive, so that you can actually get started and working. So what they now have is the ability to copy the folder structure, paste it anywhere you want, give it a name, and it will copy the subfolders, the structure, but the folders will be empty. And over here, where it's showing you get to the working folder, it's also going to create the local folders on your local workspace. Let's take a look at that. This is really simple and easy. And let's go to this particular folder right here. I've got assemblies, components, and drawings. So I simply just right click and I just copy the folder. When I paste it, I'm going to create a folder called 102. And it will create the local folders on my drive, and I'll just hit copy. So if I go to my designs folder and I look at my local workspace, I see the P102 and my folders are here and they are empty. So if you're creating new files and saving, you don't have to worry about the folder not being there, creating one and maybe you don't have the same name. Now you got duplicate folders that are supposed to be the same name, but they're not. And you start creating a bit of a mess. This has been around, or it's been a request for a long time, is to create the structure initially, populate the local workspace, and it gives someone a place to work. Okay, that's that. All right, so this one, this is the non-tip versions. This is, does anyone know what non-tip versions are and why they're a problem? It's a user group, so I'm going to put it out to the group.
Never heard of it before.
Okay. Anyone else? All right, well, I will tell you, using Vault, you won't see it so much if you use the item master, but if you do file management, you see it all the time. This is the most common issue with Vault Pro when we use the job processor. Again, those of you using the item master don't normally use the job processor. If you are, you're typically using a third-party software called COOLORANGE, which we're getting into actually with this particular topic right here. And how do we eliminate this? So what a non-tip version is it's an absolute nuisance. So I am going to bring up Vault here for a second and go to my non-tip version. So right now, this file is pre-released. We're going to talk about the pre-released and post-release, or release to manufacturers shortly. But right now, this file is released. If I go to the job queue, right, it's empty. But let's say I go to this file and I take the drawing and I change its state, WIP. I'm not going to do it for the sake of time. But I open the file, I check it out, I modify it, I check it back in, and then I change the state back to being released. It doesn't matter if it's released or pre-released. This is released. Okay, so again, I'll pick on Kim. She's unaware that I just changed this file. She goes in, and then she's unaware, well, I just did something. She's going to change the state to WIP. She's going to check the file out. She's going to edit, and then she's going to put it back into Vault, and then she changes the state back to being released. Now, if we look at the job queue, we have a bunch of jobs to be processed. So I'll talk about these little notifications that come up shortly. So what's happening is when you set the file to be released, jobs get executed. For instance, we want PDFs to be created, visualization files to be created, things like that. The job processor that I use is on a different computer. I just brought it up here, sharing its screen in my screen, a remote desktop to it so you can actually see it. I'll minimize this so it's less confusing. There, it's a separate computer. Here's my job processor, and I'm going to pause and I'm going to resume. So it's going to run the jobs. The problem is I created a couple of jobs in the queue. It didn't process. And then Kim created, she changed the exact same file, and you see I'm having a bit of an error in here. And that's on purpose because these are what they call the non-tip versions. Really bad wording. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It's completely ambiguous. I'll let these jobs finish and they'll get back and I'll show you what's going on here. Just about done. Okay, so in here, do a little refresh, look at the job queue, and lo and behold, we have non-tip versions. So basically, I check my file in, I change the state to be released. It's a version of a file. When you check out and check in, it creates a version. When you change the state, it creates another version. The job didn't get processed. So Kim did the same thing. She checked hers in. The job processor was looking for the latest version. And they call these non-tip versions because my version never gets processed because Kim's superseded mine. So mine are errors. This is a problem. So we're going to shut. The only thing I can do is remove these. These will never process. And we have to watch the job queue. And this is the #1 error with Vault Pro using file management. I'll remove these. So there's a couple of solutions. The first one is before anyone changes the state of a file, they have to look at the job queue and they have to go through it, see if their file is in there. There's no search. And sometimes there's hundreds of files in the queue to be processed, depending on the company, how many users and what they're doing. It's unrealistic. Nobody does it. The second solution, which is the real solution, the best solution, is to use a third-party option. We use COOLORANGE. They specifically create products just for Vault, just for managing data. And the way that it works is you'll get these little notifications saying, hey, you can't change the state because the job is in the queue waiting to be processed. This is what we want. We want automatic. We want to be prevented from doing something that will create errors or ambiguity inside of the Vault. So the way it works is like this. This whole webinar and the user group for today talks about the ability to automate Inventor and Vault without being a programmer. So this third-party program, when you install it, I'm showing it to you as is. So it creates this folder called Power Events, and these are the events. So it comes with the software. I'm using it, again, as is, very, very little editing. If I look at the disabled, I just take, that's a job that I created. I'll show you in a little bit later on in the seminar, today's user group rather. And this one, it comes with the product, it ships with the product. I just removed it so I could show you the error. If I take this, all I do is put it here. It's now working. So typically, this is how it would be no matter what. I'm going to go to Vault. And I'm just going to close Vault and restart it. So make sure it sees all of the new code. Because again, I'm doing this for today's user group. But once it's set, you basically leave it. You launch Vault, it looks at the code that was installed and it just runs. There's nothing you have to do. There's no add-ins you have to tick off to make sure they're loading. You install, it's called Power Events. You just install it and you're done. And it has the code that's already pre-baked for the most common tasks that we do. And one of those is the non-tip versions. So if I do this once more, I'll release it. So now it's in the job queue to be processed. This little notification comes up. This is installed with the Power jobs. And what this is letting me know that, hey, I've submitted some jobs to the queue. Also, if there's any issues with those, it'll let me know that there's a problem. Otherwise, you have to look at the job queue to make sure there's an issue. If me or anyone else goes to change the state of this file, you get a message, can't do it. The reason why you can't do it is that there's jobs in the queue waiting to be processed. So it prevents you from creating these non-tip versions. Everything's smooth and clean and just works really, really nice. Again, I'm using this out of the box. So for those of you that are unaware of the job processor, every 10 minutes, it looks at the job queue to see if any work needs to be done. And again, most of you using the item master are not taking advantage of this. You still can if you use the item master, but you really need to do some homework to make sure it's running properly. For those of you doing file management, this is built in, it'll run automatically. And then all I'm going to do is I got to wait 1 to 10 minutes for this to run. Or again, we're doing a user group. I'm not going to wait. I'm just going to make it run right now. So at this point in time, once the files are processed, then they're open, they're out of the job queue. If any of these jobs have an error, I'll get a blue notification letting me know that, so I know ahead of time. I don't go a day, 2 days, or 3 days before I find out, hey, there was an issue with a file that I did, a week ago. So we'll know exactly what's going on. If they process, it's done, we're good to go. All right. Then one of the other things we are doing with the Power Jobs, creating PDF files. And what's really nice about this, creating PDF files that have watermarks right on it. I put the state right on the file, so I know anyone looking at this file, this is pre-release. It's not ready for production. It's nice to make sure this is really clear, concise. And we'll talk about this watermark and how we can control that and define it, font, opacity, all of those settings. So that is the COOLORANGE, the Power Jobs, which really automates a lot of the mundane tasks inside of the Vault Pro. All right. So another one is if we look at updating properties, there's a file that's released. If I take it from release to work in progress, it bumps the rev. So if it bumps the rev and I would print this file out, the one thing I really need to make sure of is that these checks and the check dates are cleared away. They're no longer valid. If I change it from release to WIP, it has to go through all new signatures again. So one of the things we can do, and most people don't do this because it takes time and energy. They kind of like circumvent and try to get around this. But using the Power Jobs, if I change the state of a file, it can automatically do things for me. And one of those things is clear these properties. And again, this code comes as is. It has what they call pre and a post. So it all depends on the permissions. If I'm released, right, a file's released, it's locked, I can't change it. If I go from release to WIP, it's editable, I can change it. So that will be a post action. If the file is WIP and it goes to released, WIP is read write, release is read only, it'll be a pre-event. And that's why we have the pre and the post. And all we do is for the post update, typically I'm going from released to WIP. If I do that, I want to clear the settings. If I go from released to quick change, I don't want to clear the settings. So it's very specific as far as what you want to do. And all I'm doing is I'm putting in my properties and I'm just setting them to null. Or for text, it's blank for the username. And for the date, it's null. And that's it. And this is done automatically. And let's go over to my taskbar. My events. And that's what's happening with this particular task right here. Now, these are just scripts. They're almost like a batch file. They're PowerShell. And if I edit, just so you can see it, I said this user group and the webinar we did in December, this is useful to help the non-programmer automate this. You don't have to go out and spend tens of thousands of dollars to get a reseller like MicroCAD to program for you. You can get this software and basically do it on your own. You don't have to be a programmer, but understanding a little bit about programming does help. I took this file as is, I just copied it. This is my post, and I just specified the release date and the WIP state. Now what I do, I use variables because many times I take my code and I'll give it to Relax. I'll give it to other companies. The only thing they have to do is plug in their data over here and the code just works. So I do variables and parameters only because I share my code an awful lot. If this was for you, and you wrote it for you, you would only have to put your states in there. So I'm going, when it goes from the release date to the WIP state, I want you to set these properties to be blank. And all I have to do here is take this file, I change the state from released to WIP, and it's actually processing it right now. I don't have to wait the 1 to 10 minutes. It's immediate because it's an event configuration and it changes it. I've got to do that one too. Not that it matters because it's the properties. So if I open up this file, I'll just open it. I'm not going to check it out. It clears all of those settings. And all I had to do is change the state. You build in your workflows, what your company standards are. And it's entirely up to you and how you do this. I'll say no to all. So completely cleared the properties. I can print this out. Anyone looking at this knows that, hey, I don't have approval dates and signatures. This is not a release document. Okay, any questions on any of that so far? Thumbs up. I can't see the screen. I can't see anything. So any input will be wonderful on my end so I can see what you're doing. But that's how we do lifecycle state changes. And again, this is just showing some of the edits that I did. and you can see item 1, release to manufacturer, is actually my released state. And the parameter is right over here. File release state name, I use it right here. And for the WIP, I use it right there. Again, if I sent this to anyone, they would simply just put in their state names, and this program works as is. We're really focused on working with the non-programmer. All right. Next topic is going from concept to production. Since I've been doing Vault Professional for the last 20 years, many times I want to start with numeric revisions for concept, R&D. When I switch it to manufacturing, at that point in time, I'd like to switch it to alpha, or it could be reversed. Maybe you start with alpha, and when it's production, you want to switch to numeric. It doesn't matter which. I'm focused on what I see the most common, which is numeric first and then alpha. So over here is my pre-release state. And this is my workflow, my transitions that a file can be in. WIP pre-released, I can go to pre-release. At that point, it syncs the properties, creates a PDF with a watermark. I want to go back to WIP. I need to make a change to it, bumps the rev, and same thing. At this point, I can change it to be obsolete. I'm done with this, want to move on to something else. Or I really want this. I want this in production. I just send it to another state called send to released to manufacturing, and that's it. The third-party script does everything for me. So basically think about it like this. If you were to do this manually, what do? You go into the file, you change the category, you change the revision, you change the revision process, you change the revision scheme. Everything you do manually can be done through the script. So whatever you can do on your own inside of Vault can be scripted to do it when you choose to. So all I got to do is change it to this state. It'll change the state to be released to manufactured. It's going to change the category, life cycle, revision, sync the properties, create a PDF with a watermark. At that point, we're now focused on this workflow, and that's all we have to do. So we look at this file right here. We're in the pre-release state. It's got a PDF file. And if we look at it, it's stamped pre-release Rev 1. This is using the out-of-the-box script. And the only thing I did was added those 2 lines. It's actually 1 line, but again, it's word wrapping it. And that's the only change that I made. And it's doing everything I would have done manually if I sat in front of the computer. I am changing the category. I'm changing the revision definition. I'm changing the revision scheme. I'm changing the rev to be A, not 1, 2, 3, or 5. I'm changing the status to be released. And I'm also updating the properties so that the PDF matches title, description, part number, whatever fields that I choose. But again, out of the box, this is the only addition I made to the script. All right, so let's take a look at that. So concept to production. So here it is here. It's in pre-released. So I take this file. I'm going to change the state to be sent to manufacturing. That's it. They're both going to get changed. I hit OK. And it's ready to be processed. It went to the job queue. It's right here. And all I have to do is wait for it. Oh, the timing worked. It's processing it right now because, again, it would just happen to be looking at it at that particular moment. It's changing both files to be fully released, production, and with the appropriate stamp on it. Come back over to here, refresh. Now, I didn't do anything other than change it to send to released, right? It did everything else. The state has been changed. The revision's been changed. And if I look at the visualization, I could do this either one way or another. My attachments here. Now, this is my preference. if I start creating PDF files, step files, DXF files, and I put them all in the same folder, it gets a little busy. I like putting them in a visualization folder just to keep them separate. At this point, if I look at this file, view in window, it's actually right here. And my release stamps are bottom right versus right on top of it. My pre-release is on top. My release to manufacturing is bottom right. I can move this anywhere I choose to. I can also relocate it based on the sheet size, depending on what my needs are. All right, so it did that. Then the only thing I did was change the state. Okay, useful? Anyone? I do miss the live user group meetings.
Very useful, Jim. I'll let you know if we have any questions.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So that's all I do. Just change the state, off it goes. And that's what we get. Now for the watermark, again, this is code that I took off their website. I just change it. For whatever reason, it's my wife's favorite color, so I use orange. The font size, you've got the alignment, and it's just, you just tweak the numbers to meet your preference. And that's all you have to do to take this code out of the box and use it productively. Okay. All right. Moving forward, ECO control. So this is another one. So the two biggest questions I get is, how do I automatically change the revision from alpha to numeric or vice versa? And the other one is, if I'm using the change order, how do I get the change order to be in the revision history automatically? So that was difficult. And what I did was I started digging into it. You know, how can we do this? How can we do this easily? So I figured I use a UDP, a user-defined property. I created something called ECO number. It doesn't exist. I created it. You can call this anything you want. I call it ECO number. It's just a property that I put into the files. And then what I did, I just, where I clear the fields by changing the state, if I go from for review to released, the system automatically looks to see if there's a change order that's controlling this file. If there is, get the change order number, and then assign that number to the user-defined property. Now that it's in the property, as you saw over here, my revision table. Now this is the one thing that doesn't work in Item Master. This only works with file management. The ECO number is mapped to the description of the rev history. So as long as I get that number in there somehow, my revision history will be updated automatically with the ECO number. Now, this code, if I was looking at it as a newbie, I'd be overwhelmed by it. It's like, what does this actually mean? And so how did I come up with that? Well, I didn't know how to do this either. I did a search. I went to the forum and I said, hey, is it possible to get the change order number of a file if it's controlled by a change order? I posted this at 5:50 in the afternoon. I got a response back at 10:40 that night. And this is the code that he sent me. Oh, sorry. Come on. I just plugged it in. I made I just did an if statement. That's all I did. But that code is verbatim from the forum. And it works. So the only thing I did, let's go back to here. So I have a file that's already started. This file is in a change order. I've already made the change. This, again, to save time, I made the change. I'll edit. I can see that the change order is number 31, right over here. You can see that. I'm going to, it's for review. I'm going to change the state to be released. That's the process. I changed the state. That little delay that you see, It's actually capturing the ECO number if it exists and putting it into the UDP. And then I'm going to close my change order. That's all I have to do. Once I wait for the file to get processed, revision history will fill in automatically. It'll put the ECO number in there for me. The ECO contains all of the notes, anything that's relative to that change. Do the markups, whatever you need to do in the ECO. That's another feature for another user group and get into the change order. But right now, this assumes that you know how to use the change order. Processing it. Again, it's capturing the ECO number. It's going to fill in the rev history. It's going to create the PDF file, and everything is going to be up to date. All right, so that's done. Do a refresh. We'll take a look at the file. ECO number is 31, rev T's filled in, date and times filled in, watermark is on the PDF file, extremely accurate. So getting the ECO number was a big deal, and it was really through the third party and just getting onto the forums and typing in a question, and I get code back. And I am not a programmer. I know a little bit more than to be dangerous, but understanding how to search, find things, and then start plugging it in when I need it, that's where I'm at. This is extremely useful for the non-programmer. All right. And then this is where Power Jobs, this is a third-party add-on. And I will, for those of you that use the Item Master, this works with the Item Master just like it does for the file management. Very, very useful to create those PDFs, watermarking. It does all of that for you. So Autodesk Vault, it creates now with 2024, it creates PDF, DXF, and step files, but Power Jobs can create these, but it also does a lot more. Like you saw, the lifecycle transition, I can do things automatically. Item lifecycle transition, folder lifecycle transitions. Over here, ERP systems, I can actually integrate dynamically with those. The difference between the orange and the gray, orange is installed with the software out of the box. Anything that is gray, it's available on their website. You simply just get what you need, download it, use the code as is, and you're off and running. So they have this GitHub for those of you that do any kind of programming. GitHub is like it's a free repository that you can post code and people can use it. And that's what COOLORANGE does. Their code is all listed on their GitHub site, and you can download any of it. You can see there's a bunch over here. The one thing that we can actually do is I can create SAT files, create STL files, whatever you want to do. It's really helpful. I just download it as is, maybe a slight modification here or there, maybe change a folder or a path, but that's about it. What they do have that's head and shoulders above the Vault is the power settings. So in Vault, if you have your lifecycle definitions, if I go from WIP to released, quick change to released, full review to released, if I'm doing anything like creating PDFs, I have to make sure each transition is modified. I have to tell it I want to do, let's see, that. Sorry, I'll go back to here. So in the transitions area, if I go from WIP to released, I have to tell it, create the visualization, create the PDF. If I go from full review to released, I got to go to the transition, same thing. I have to do it for each one. However, with the power settings, all I have to do is say, run this script or do this whenever the file gets to be released. It doesn't matter where it's coming from. If it's WIP, full review, quick change, if it gets to be released, do this. It makes managing Vault a lot easier. and we call those power settings. So for instance, we have a lot of companies that do sheet metal, and when they do sheet metal, they would like their part files maybe to have DXF files. DXF files, not of every IPT file, only an IPT file that is sheet metal. So what we can do is I can specify this. For instance, this one is, if you look over here, this is my pre-release create PDF file, and only do this for IDWs and DWGs. I'm filtering, and only when it gets to pre-released. Run that script no matter what when a file gets to be pre-released. The advantage of this is normal Autodesk Vault. You do the transition, it'll send both IDW and IPT. IPTs are not supported, but it gets processed and then kicked out because it's unsupported. So you're setting 2 jobs versus 1. So this here, you're setting less jobs to the queue to be processed, which means everything gets done faster. Right? So over here, I can create, this started with 23, I believe, that when I transition from work in progress to released, do all of this. I have to repeat all of this, quick change to release. I have to repeat this again for review to be released. Whereas with the Power Job settings, when you get released, just do this. Now, those of you who are not aware of this, this is a custom UDP. Doc subtype name, I don't know why it's so cryptic. That just helps you identify if a file is modeled or sheet metal. That's the difference between them. The one I've been using a lot, most of you may have seen me do this, was if I have something that came out of Content Center, I typically create a property that's called is CC part, if it's true, right? So I know that's a Content Center. I want to manage it one way or another. If it's not Content Center, you know, it's going to be a regular file and it's managed another way. Same with this. If it's sheet metal, right over here, doc type name, sheet metal. Because I have that property, if I map it, I can use that. So when I create DXF from sheet metal, I want to filter just IPT files. I don't want a DXF of an assembly of only the sheet metal parts. That's all I need. And when I go to release to manufacturing, I don't need it when it's pre-release. I only want it when it's fully released. So that job only gets run when this criteria is met and when that state gets hit. And the way we do that, maximize this. Here's my vault. And we have the Power Job settings right here. Right here. Come on. There we go. You specify the script that you create or download. And this one here is, again, this DXF from sheet metal. I downloaded it from the COOLORANGE website. I just put Power Jobs in front of it so I know that it's mine. And for the trigger, I just specify IPT files, sheet metal. And if I come on down, I'm only going to run it when the file gets to be released to manufacture. That's it. Close that. Come on. That's not minimizing. I'm not sure why. Okay. Let's see if I can move it off my screen. There we go. Right. That's better. So this file right here, or this assembly, and it doesn't matter if I'm doing assemblies, part files, drawing files. If I take this file and I change the state, work in progress, it's a small little assembly. See that I've got 3 separate IPT files. There's a slight delay, again, when I'm switching from release to WIP, because the Power Jobs is actually running those pre and post state changes. What does it need to do? So it's a brief pause, but then it does everything I need. Now, when I change the state back to being released, actually, I'm sorry, this one goes to for review. We got some jobs to be run. I'll just run it over here. At this point, it's not going to run that sheet metal trigger because I'm at for review. I'm not in the release to manufacture state. Just running those jobs right now, and we're just about done. So it makes managing the transitions a lot easier. Again, for those of you that have done that in the past, you have to manage each transition: WIP to release, for review to release, quick change to release. Anything you're doing, you've got to triplicate it. I think I just made up a word, but you have to put it in all 3 different transitions. But in the end, they're all doing the same thing when it gets to that state. With these triggers, you simply just specify it once, and it's a lot easier to manage the system. So if a rule is not running, we know what's going on, we know how it works. And this is just about done processing, and then I got 3 left. So once I release it, it's going to create the DXF file, and those files also get rev controlled. As a file edits, gets updated, rev A, rev B, rev C. Same thing with that, the DXF files, the step files, the STL files, and if you wanted to, 3D PDF files, you could do that as well. That's something that you cannot do without Power Jobs. Okay, that's done. And at this point, for review, I'll change their state to be released, and then that is it. I'm going to get processed, and once this finishes, just wait for the notification to pop up. It will in a second. Again, changing a state. It's going through the files and making any update necessary changes. There we go. Blue notification should pop up. 9 jobs. And now they're being processed. Now it's going to do the final jobs that I specified when it goes to release to manufacture. Any questions while the file's being processed? And I can just show you that, the visualization when they're finished. But at that is the end of the presentation, right about 1 hour on time. That's rare for me, so I do thank you for your patience in holding on there.
Thank you so much, Jim. This was great. Definitely very, very useful stuff if you want to make your life easier. And I wanted to remind everyone that if you want to learn any of these topics in detail, you can always take a custom training with Jim or someone else in our team. And we also offer group classes online. So we encourage you to be checking the MicroCAD website for future webinars. We have coming up next on March 27 at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. One product, many tools, design harmony with the Autodesk PDM collection. So yeah, if there are no more questions, I would like to thank you, Jim, again, and thank you, all the attendees, for being here today.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
ma'am. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
What was that, Kim?
Thank you.
My pleasure.
The webinar has ended. Thank you for joining. Goodbye.